I decided to support the National Autism Trainer Programme because I'd been involved from the outset, from before it was official. And I wanted to provide my lived experience as an autistic Arab mother and of my son who's on the CAMS waiting list, and as a special needs teacher as well, and to support CAMS trainers and understand it from a perspective that they might not necessarily have heard from before. One of the top benefits that I think I bring when I co-deliver with NHS professionals are anchoring the theory with examples, my lived experience. So I would bring in, for example, an experience that brings to life some of the theory, like the double empathy problem. So I would talk about a misunderstanding in the workplace where I was asked to write down a list to order for my students, and then I'd say, oh, but can you give me the example from the other staff, the other teachers? And I was seen as being difficult from the manager's perspective, and I thought they were being difficult by not providing that simple information. And so this is a double empathy example that I share with the delegates in the programme, and it really helps anchor the double empathy problem. And then they start reflecting on how that could be potentially in their own setting. So they use my examples in their own practice. Another example is when I was going through depression, and I had a series of questions asked of me from my GP. And I shared this example with CAMS clinicians who found it quite useful for their own practice, because I illustrated how my mind catastrophized, and it's something that potentially the young people that they work with might do the same. And in answering my GP's question, I thought that the GP might take my children away from me if I admitted I was having, for example, suicide thoughts or ideation, but not practically following it through. I still catastrophized and thought they would take my children. And what was really interesting is the CAMS clinicians really reflected on that exercise, talking about catastrophizing and thinking about, well, if they're working with young people who could have a similar loss, thinking that they're losing power in their own lives, because they too might not share that they're going through depression and they're going through hard times, but they won't share that because they're scared that there might be consequences to that. And so what I found was just sharing my simple experience allowed us as a group to consider how that we can support young people who are going through depression as well. So I feel like that although my experiences might sound morbid, but I think it's really important that it helps to apply it potentially in practice as well. The two main things I'd say are fundamental when working with co-facilitators for this programme would be pre-planning, especially with far in advance of delivering the programme, because it helps us build confidence and understand what slides people are comfortable with delivering, but also creates assurances and getting to know each other, because I'm coming in as an expert by experience, and it's nice to introduce myself and I get to know the NHS professionals I'm co-delivering with. So that pre-planning period is really nice, not just to just delegate the slides and the content, but also to get to know each other, because we become part of a team. I become part of their team as well. And the second part, I think, is a great bonus. It's actually, for me, it's essential, is having a positive team. because I thrive around positive energy and people who are supportive. And mostly, in my experience, most, if not all, the NHS professionals that I've worked with have been very positive and have made me feel very comfortable in co-delivering with them. And we've allowed for the mistakes to happen because that's just part of us being human. And so those are the two main things I would say are fundamental. One of the challenges I have experienced with the co-delivering the programme has been a lack of communication with some of the co-facilitators, and it resulted in a lot of confusion, a lot of anxieties, and it made it. I found that if they don't communicate the way my preferences are, like via email, if it's done on the phone, it's very hard to work together. So we need to understand communication preferences, and that one example failed in that area. There was no blame, it was just another misunderstanding, and it was sorted out relatively quickly once we've identified that was the issue, because dates of the sessions had to be cancelled, and although it was a little bit of extra work to be done with the co-facilitators, we did resolve it in the end, and I did have to provide solutions as options, and they were fine with it. But it just goes to show how important it is to communicate on the outset to avoid any potential issues. But even with those potential mistakes or oversights, we did resolve them in the end, and again because of clear communication. One of the, I think, is helpful for supporting my co-deliverers is to give them assurances. A lot of the NHS professionals I work with, it's the first time that they're delivering this programme or delivering any kind of programme. And it's really nice that I can share and assure them and give them that confidence that it's okay to be nervous, because it does mean that we care about delivering. Those nerves, those excitement, those feelings just means that we care. And what I like to do is give them a tool whereby if they do feel overwhelmed during the presentation, is to just say, have you got anything else to add, Eiman? And then I'll help them, and it's a cue for me to come in and step in. So I find that there are certain cues I give them beforehand so that they can feel assured, not just before the delivery, but also during the delivery, that they are supported as well. I've had many positive experiences in sharing not just my own experiences, but seeing like eureka moments where, for example, when you commonly hear so many times in my experience the idea that we're all a little bit autistic, and I've helped delegates understand why that is not the case by using specific examples, especially the litmus test, the need versus preference. So I would again share my experience working in an open office plan and explaining to them that my brain wouldn't function in an open office plan because of all the sensory overwhelm from various things, not just noise and light, but also movement. And whilst for me it was a need because I wasn't functioning, I wasn't being able to work in that environment, my colleague might have had a preference for low lighting or dimmed lighting and low sound, but that doesn't mean he or she or they haven't been able, they can still function in that environment. So for me, it's a need, and for somebody else, it might be a preference to have a similar environment to what I prefer, what I need. rather, and they would prefer that. I've seen that light bulb moment so many times, and the feedback I've got from just sharing that example really hones in why we're not all a little bit autistic. But also sharing some lovely examples from my own students when I work with them, and hearing positive things. Like when I was working with one student, I fondly remember, because I was trying to be funny and amusing to him, but that backfired really quickly, because I said something like, lamely, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" And he just rolled his eyes, sighed, and just said, "To be the butt of an annoyingly large number of jokes." And that's just gave me like a step back and think how accurate this autistic person is. It just goes to show how accurate most autistic students are, in my experience. And I love sharing that, because it shows the humour as well of our young people.